Thank you, Dr. Dinesh. So, safe sport has emerged as a topic of discussion and interest in the sporting world, and a great area of concern globally as sporting organizations step up the fight against abuse, harassment, and neglect. Locally, there has also been much focus and effort put into ensuring safe sport, with the Safe Sport Unified Code being launched in November last year. So today, we are very privileged to have two distinguished speakers with experience and much work put into safe sport in Singapore. So our first speaker for the afternoon is Ms. Wang Shao Ing. Shao leads the Safe Sport team at SportSG that is responsible for the implementation of a harmonized framework for safeguarding in sport, the Safe Sport program. A lawyer by training, Shao was led from legal practice to coaching rugby and teaching before taking on her current role. Before taking on her current role, the former captain and head coach of the national women's rugby team, she has served on committees in the sports governing bodies regionally and internationally. Shao is also a World Rugby Judicial Officer and was appointed to the Rio Olympics, the Rugby World Cup, and the Tokyo Olympics. Today, she will be delivering a talk entitled Safeguarding in Sport. Her presentation will explore non-accidental violence in sports, insights from the community-wide consultations, and how they shaped Singapore's Safe Sport Unified Code, and the importance of initiatives towards a trauma-informed approach to safeguarding, understanding prevalence, and assessing the severity of abuse and harassment. So without further ado, I will hand over the time to Ms. Wang Shao Ing.
Afternoon, everyone. Thanks a lot, Shauna, for the introduction. Thank you for spending your time here this afternoon. I'm just going to share my screen first. Thank you. So yeah, as Shauna shared, my background is in rugby. Because it is a contact sport, I feel like I have a special affinity with the medical community, the sports medicine especially, be it from sports trainers to physios to the sports physician to orthopedic surgeons. And that's been the case, from the time that I was playing to the time that I've been coaching. And so when Shauna first approached me to do this, I thought that, yeah, for sure, and it's also an opportunity to talk more about safe sport. You will see on the slide here that the logo on the right-hand side, the top says the Safe Sport Commission Singapore. That is the commission that, as the lead of the Safe Sport Task Force, we serve as a secretariat to the commission, and they are the ones that will be the body representing and responsible for implementing the Safe Sport program. So it is in this capacity as well that I'll be sharing some of the things that we'll be talking about today. But first, I thought we'd provide a frame, right, for talking about safeguarding in sport. So what exactly is safeguarding? And I think if you had been following what had happened in the Winter Olympics, it would have been hard to avoid news about, the ice skating community. As we speak, ISU, so the International Skating Union, is voting to determine whether there should be a minimum age for competitions. I didn't even watch the final skate of this particular Russian skater, but when I read in the news that she had fallen 4 times in the final skate, I couldn't help but feel very heavy in my heart, because it is a 15-year-old, and quite apart from the doping issues that had plagued her right until that final, there were plenty of questions raised about the Russian skating sort of environment, whether some of these athletes would ever skate beyond one Olympic Games. Were they simply too young, right, to be executing some of the skills that they were asked to execute? Were they too injured to skate beyond one Olympic Games? And, just generally, who was looking out for them? So when we talk about safeguarding in sport, the word safeguarding has 2 parts. The first part is safe, right? Who are we protecting? Who are we safeguarding? And secondly, what are we really protecting these people who we are safeguarding against? So I think there are 2 terms here that we should be familiar with as we get through to this afternoon. So, and I don't think I'll spend more than half an hour kind of talking really about sharing about our experiences. which one is safe sport, which is a noun that talks about the environment, and the second is safeguarding as an action, right, as a verb. And so when I thought about putting this together for your specific community, then I thought about, if I could address these three things in terms of the environment. So what is non-accidental violence in sport? What is the impacts on the individuals and all the other participants? Why does the athletic environment put some of the participants at risk in sport particularly? And how or what indicators can help you identify, right, when somebody is experiencing non-accidental violence in sport? In terms of our actions, what is the experience of the Singapore sporting community, and why do we need to rethink our approach in safeguarding here in Singapore? And how can allied health professionals such as yourself play a part in creating a safe sporting environment? So safe sport is, and this is the problem with safe sport, it sometimes gets, it's confused with sport safety. Some of you might be familiar as well. Sport safety refers to like the physical safety of someone. So for example, lightning alerts, whether someone is dehydrated at the pool. Now, when we talk about safe sport, there are lots of terms that are used under the umbrella terms. You might have heard of abuse and harassment, mistreatment or maltreatment. And then there's gender-based violence or interpersonal violence. So those are the umbrella terms, but I think the words in red are the ones that we're more familiar with on a day-to-day basis. So bullying, sexual grooming, hazing, stalking, trolling. So these are the items which we read in the newspapers on a daily basis, or which we see, right, when we read articles. So safe sport really is an athletic environment that is respectful, equitable, and free from non-accidental violence. And this will be some of the definitions that we'll be going through today, right? The IOC consensus statement is the one that has defined what safe sport is. I think we don't have to go very far back. It was only in 2016 when Larry Nassar, the medical doctor for the USA gymnastics team, right, was convicted. I think it was 175 years in jail, right, for the sexual abuse that was perpetrated against countless number of USA gymnasts. And that was 5 years ago, but the consequences continue to reverberate today. An associate of his committed suicide last year after more charges were brought against him for human trafficking and sexual assault. This year, after Simone Biles competed at the Olympic Games, she stepped off the plane and went to, testify before a Senate hearing committee about, just USA gymnastics in general and the US Olympic Committee. So I think we would be foolish to think that it was just USA gymnastics or gymnastics in general. We've seen this reverberate across, right, gymnastics across the world. So, Gymnastics Australia, Dutch Gymnastics, New Zealand and Australia, in terms of abuse and harassment that's happening within their environments. It's not just gymnastics as well. Soccer or football has been going through something of its own in terms of historical cases that have, been reported, not just in the UK, but in Haiti. And it's not just football or coach related. So, there are officials who are involved in this abuse and harassment. It's not just coach-athlete behavior. It's also not cultural, right? It's not just confined to single cultures. So in Japan, there was a Human Rights Watch report about how children, and especially corporal punishment and the culture of corporal punishment in Japan is really leading to a lot of physical abuse for children in sport. I think one of the more really upsetting and sort of stories came out of South Korea, where one of the triathletes committed suicide after, she had reported, and this was acknowledged by the Korean Olympic Council, that she had gone to at least 5 to 6 organizations to report about what was happening to her within the team culture, both by her fellow athletes, the team captain, as well as the coach. So as we can see, all these global stories provide cautionary tales for us. In Singapore, there was a spate of incidents between coach athletes. These were reported in the press. Most of them involve underage children. So I mean, children and young persons. And a lot of it was to do with sexual grooming. And again, you can see that a lot of these incidents happen to boys, right, as well as girls. But in recent years, we've also seen an increase in different types of reports on abuse and harassment. So it's not just sexual in nature. Athletes have begun to speak out about things like body shaming. Last year, there was an incident that was reported in the press again because it became a criminal conviction about someone who was stalking a fellow athlete by creating multiple accounts on social media, appearing at her house, right? Really like making his presence felt in her environment at trainings and both outside of the training environment. So you might have also read about, some of our athletes who have trained overseas. So when we talk about some of these behaviors, right, things like these are evidently not criminal. So I think the three things that we can take out of this is, first of all, there is a whole spectrum of behavior. So not all harmful behaviors are criminal under domestic laws. Body shaming is not a crime. Cyberbullying is not a crime. And there are also new threats, right, posed by our virtual environments. I think the National Youth Council of Singapore has done a survey and that, 90% of our youths aged 15 to 19 are using social media networks in Singapore. As a highly connected society, this virtual environment poses threats. It used to be when I was an athlete, I only need to see my coach and my other teammates at training. It was a physical interaction, but now it can be 24/7 because people can WhatsApp me, my coach can get to know me through Instagram, slide into my DMs. And in recognition of the fact that there are new crimes perpetrated in this environment, our penal code was amended in 2020 to include voyeurism, upskirting, unsolicited intimate images, or cyber flashing. The other thing that's really important to note is that these type of behaviors are not limited, right? So they're not limited to gymnastics, they're not limited to artistic sports. Research has shown that there's no significant difference with regards to age, whether it's your level of performance or your type of sport, or the clothing that's required for competition. And the last thing is that you can see from the articles that everybody is responsible. This is not just a coach-athlete problem. The coach obviously has a special duty of care with respect to the athletes, and he or she as a coach always holds a special position. There's a lot of respect accorded to coaches within our environment, but it is a problem that permeates all participants. Anybody can be a person who is affected or experiences non-accidental violence in sport, and anyone can be the perpetrator as well, whether you're a volunteer, sport administrator, medical staff, or leader of an organization. So the incidence is disquieting. The things that we see in the newspapers are just press reports, and that's just one indicator, which is really the tip of the iceberg. Formal reporting to the Safe Sport Taskforce has increased over the last 2 years. When we look at anonymous self-reporting, for example, when we did a focus group with the athletes, nearly 70 to 80%, I think minimum 70%, right, reported that they had themselves personally experienced psychological abuse, okay, and or 70% at a minimum also had witnessed this happen to someone else. And the truth is, we'll actually never really know what Verterman called the dark number, right? What is the real prevalence on the ground. Having said that, there are a lot of new reports that are coming out. So for example, and this was a program that's co-funded by the Erasmus project of the European Union. They've just released a report on the child abuse across 6 European countries, where 10,000 adults took part. 65% of the adults reported experiencing some sort of psychological violence as when they were children, and 44% reported experiencing physical violence, and there's some numbers there with respect to sexual violence as well. So those are really concerning, and more needs to be done to understand prevalence. In terms of why definitions are important, it's only when we recognize, and by defining, then we can recognize what exactly non-accidental violence is. Only when that happens, then can people report, can organizations respond and remedy the issue. I'm going to keep referring to this Safe Sport Unified Code Community Consultations Interim Report in this presentation. And you can download it. Basically, within the report, it describes, some of the feedback from our sporting community over the last year when we went through about 8 to 9 sort of focus group sessions with over 200 participants. What we found is that there's a general lack of awareness of what is non-accidental violence within our sporting community. So athletes shared that on hindsight, they saw incidents and they should have said something or reported it because they only now realize that these behaviors were inappropriate. And I'll be talking about why this is the case, right? Why does this happen? Why do people think that some of these behaviors are okay? Examples were given of excessive physical training that was justified by the coach because it was about toughening up, and then the athletes only recognized this later when the teammate had suffered a long-lasting internal injury, right? There were concerns raised about overtraining, and athletes felt guilty, right? Even though they felt like they experienced pain which could worsen during the training, because being an athlete and sport is all about pushing through your physical and mental barriers. Many people felt that verbal abuse had been normalized in the sporting environment. Verbally abusing athletes, particularly by coaches, was seen as passion for the sport. So these are some of the things which were reflected within those focus group sessions. So the International Olympic Committee has come out very strongly, especially in the past few years, in terms of safeguarding in sport. Their working group, which is for the prevention of harassment and abuse in sport, includes the Medical and Scientific Commission, and for good reason, because I'm about to explain, and I thought with this group that it would be appropriate to explain, right, to break down. Normally, when we give workshops, we just say this is the definition given by IOC, right? That there are these 5 main types of harassment and abuse. Okay, which is physical, sexual, and psychological, and that includes neglect. So if I can break down that framework for you, this IOC consensus statement, right? This is the conceptual model, which is the extract taken out of the consensus statement, and you can download this from the British Journal of Medical Science. So the discrimination based on power differentials is the start, and this can be cultural in nature. And then it leads to different mechanisms where this non-accidental violence can take place. So it could be contact, non-contact. As I mentioned before, it can be online. It could be as a result of bullying or hazing. And psychological abuse is really at the core of all of these other types of abuses, because it's hard to think of, physical abuse or sexual abuse that doesn't have some sort of psychological element. So within this consensus statement, there are all these examples based on research, right, about what exactly is psychological, physical, sexual abuse, and then what is neglect. So it's only when we define these terms and say and talk about them that we can recognize when abuse is taking place. As medical professionals or allied health professionals on the front line, I think you will recognize that the impact is sometimes profound and the trauma can be long-lasting. So this could be anything from physical injuries to mental health issues, cognitive problems, emotional problems. And these impacts could be behavioral in nature. People are more likely to, the research has shown that people are more likely, victims of abuse and harassment are more likely to drop out of sport or more likely to dope or cheat. They may suddenly experience difficulties in interpersonal relationships. In terms of their emotional behaviors, they might suddenly become more disruptive, from becoming docile to aggressive. As somebody who, receives reports, this is something that some of the affected parties have, related to us as well, that when they reflect upon what has happened to them in the past, they see that they did change in personality, became more rebellious because of what had happened to them. And so these impacts are not just short-term, but really can profoundly impact an individual, especially children and young persons. We were able to we were given access to the Beijing Winter Olympics medical meetings videos, and I took this extract out in terms of the role of the medical entourage right? When we're talking about the medical perspective. So these are the things that, you could see from a clinical perspective, that somebody has been forced or mandated inappropriate physical activity, not age appropriate or physically inappropriate in terms of training loads, this person might be presented to you with certain physical sort of symptoms. It could be a pattern of deliberate, prolonged, repeated non-contact behaviors within a power differential relationship, and I'll talk about the power imbalance in a bit. Or it could be neglect, so the failure of someone with a duty of care to an athlete to provide the minimum level of care, which is then in turn causing the harm. So what is it about our sporting environment that makes, right, all these, that makes abuse and harassment such risks for our participants? I think, everyone believes in the power of sport, right? And therefore, its social and mental and physical benefits are, I think we don't need to talk about them. And that's why there's this inherent trust about sport. And many of us devote our lives to sport, because we're passionate about it and we want to contribute back. So a lot of times, even I know the medical staff sometimes do it out of a voluntary basis, they're not paid for it. So, it's all about passion and trust and sport as a force for good. But we need to recognize that within the sporting environment, there is a power imbalance. In fact, in the IOC consensus statement, it says that this unequal distribution of psychological power is the central feature of all abusive relationships in sport, right? So there are people who athletes rely on to be selected. There are, be it the coach, be it sport administrators, could be presidents of the associations. Sorry. The other sort of feature within the sporting environment is that, there are a lot of children and young persons who have a deference to authority, right? Especially within our culture where the coach is to be respected. You listen to what the coach tells you. For vulnerable persons or people with disabilities, the research has shown that children with disabilities are 4 times more likely to suffer abuse than children without disabilities. During our focus group sessions, which was very specific to the parasport community, the reflections were that, there's a huge dependence on volunteers. People don't report because they are worried that they'll lose a volunteer. It's already really hard to find people who are willing to volunteer within this community. So it's hard to break those bonds. The other thing, of course, is the emphasis on winning, right, for high performance sport. And, I've already raised examples of resilience. What's the idea of resilience versus enduring abusive behaviors within our environment? People feel like because, this is what it takes to win, and this is what it takes to transcend myself, my physical and mental barriers, and therefore I need to endure this. So there is that, that gray sort of area. And just generally, sporting organizations lack oversight and capacity to deal with incidents of this sort. It's complex and time-consuming. So these are sort of the factors that, within our sporting environment that pose risks to participants. Now, the problem is that when these things happen and when people tolerate these kind of behaviors, they become permissible and then normalized, and then people become disillusioned, right? The boundaries that you thought were there or you felt were your personal or physical boundaries are no longer the same as you thought. They become blurred, right? And then that starts to become an erosion of trust. This is when factions happen, and for organizations, it could result in participant dropout, loss of sponsorship, reputational damage for the organization as a whole. So what are countries all over the world doing about this? Since we know that this is inherent to the sporting environment, this is the way it is, but this is what, that sport is great and it has all these social and sort of physical benefits, but this is also the reality of the sporting environment. So if we look across the world, more and more countries are beginning to do something about this. And, based on our experience here at the Safe Sport Taskforce, there's no silver bullet. We've spoken to many of these other countries, the US Center of Safe Sport, Sport New Zealand. There's no silver bullet. Everybody has a different landscape in terms of where they are operating in. But there is a global mobilization. There is an athlete demand for something to be done about safeguarding in sport. Independence is also one of the key things that is emerging across all of these jurisdictions in terms of, having cases being managed independently as opposed to within the organizations, which is a oneself check oneself sort of situation. So if we look at Singapore's obligations generally, we are a signatory to the United Nations Conventions on the Rights of the Child or Persons with Disabilities. We're also a member of the Commonwealth, right? And there is a Commonwealth consensus statement promoting human rights in and through sport that talks about a policy of zero tolerance for violence, harassment, and abuse or discrimination. Sport-specific ones, of course, the IOC has its code of ethics. The IPC has, a policy on non-accidental violence. Within Singapore's domestic framework, there is the penal code, but like we discussed, even though there are other things like the Children and Young Persons Act, the Mental Capacity Act, Protection from Harassment Act, there are non-accidental violence, right? Some of these behaviors are not criminal in nature, so we can't just rely on the criminal framework. I think in the beginning when Shauna introduced our talk today, that there is a Safe Sport Unified Code, and that was just launched in November 2022. The key signatories are the Singapore National Olympic Council, Singapore National Paralympic Council, and Sport Singapore. And so what is that unified code, right? And I'll talk about that in a bit, but really it is a harmonized framework for Singapore in terms of how we approach safeguarding in sport. So the fundamental question is it possible, right, for all our sports to have a common rules about abuse and harassment? And this was what the Unified Code consultations was about in 2021. Although the pandemic has stopped a lot of sporting activity from taking place, I think in spite of that, or maybe because of that, people were really interested in coming forward and communicating again within our sporting environment. We met with 8 different stakeholder groups: athletes, coaches, parents, volunteers, safeguarding officers, sports administrators, the parasport community, to talk about, whether there are these fundamental sort of rules that we can agree on what is abuse and harassment in sport in Singapore, right? Particular to our culture, particular to our country. And, this cut across 68 organizations and all kinds of sports. So there were over 200 participants. Again, those reports are up on our website if you want to view them. We sought the advice of experts from MSF, the MOE, police, KK Women's Children's Hospital, in particular the psychologists from their trauma network, the Singapore Children's Society, as well as AWARE. So all these people who are experts in safeguarding in terms of how these guidelines will fit within our sporting community. I thought I would take this opportunity to play this very quick video. It's only 3 minutes about, how the Unified Code came into place, and so that you can hear for yourself firsthand, right, from the participants, what their feelings and thoughts were.
Hi, I'm Nurul, and I'm a member of the Singapore Para-Athletes Commission.
Hi, my name is Dr. Teo Chin Sim, and I'm a sports physician and the chair of the Singapore National Olympic Council Women in Sport Committee.
Hi, I'm Mark J. I'm chair of the Singapore National Olympic Council's Athletes Commission.
Safe sport is critical to the safeguarding of athletes.
In the para-sport community, a lot of the athletes with disabilities are generally more vulnerable.
We want to grow the whole ecosystem, and safe sport is an important part of this.
The important thing to do with safe sports is to ensure that this aspect of governance of sport gets a big boost. Generally making sure that everybody who takes part in sport, whether you're in training as an athlete, whether you're administrating the sport, in management, you're a coach, all of these different roles in sports have to be protected.
I like it that we are taking this approach. It's more ground-up basis, and we listen to the athlete's voice, and they are the ones that are actually important. With this unified code, it gives a more structured policies for athletes and all the NSAs to adopt.
I think more importantly, the main two parties, they are the athletes and the coaches. So, for example, what does that look like on the ground? So the idea would be to create a healthy culture.
Great that this has come about, because I think there's very little awareness of the do's and don'ts for the coaches and for the administrative point of view. At least if we were to see something or hear something, at least we know that is this within the boundaries of the code, or is it not?
Today I think the focus group helped me to understand that there are a lot of new ways of neglect, abuse. How do we actually ensure this safe environment, right? And it starts with this code.
I think it is important as a sporting nation to really look at how do we then protect the athletes. The key takeaway that I had today is that the psychological impact that it has actually on our athletes could be lifelong.
I think it's where clubs comes in, private academies. I think that's when we need this unified code. With that, everybody can be on the same page.
This really allows Singapore to have our own version of what we hope to implement as a system.
As an athlete and being part of the Safe Sport Commission, I'm really excited for the unified code to be formed and implemented, and I think we are going in the right direction.
Our Women in Sport committee has been involved right from the beginning. We were privileged to do so during its development as well as the consultative process.
The code is truly unified and inclusive in that the perspectives of various stakeholders from a wide range of backgrounds were taken into consideration.
Safe sport isn't just about protecting just the athlete. It's about creating an environment where everyone is able to succeed and everyone is very proud to stand behind this industry that we have, which is sports.
I'm excited at the launch of the Safe Sport Unified Code.
I'm very happy to be part of this unified code.
We are so happy and encouraged and are 100% in support of the Safe Sport program and the unified code which is about to be launched today.
Yeah, so, there was the launch in November 2021 and in 2022, we'll be implementing that framework across the national sporting associations. So, if you want to find out more, you can go to our website, you can download the code as well as understand more. We just want to, just a couple of slides more for me to explain what exactly is the work of the Safe Sport Commission. So in terms of the Safe Sport program, which is the framework that helps to implement this code, there are really three main features, which is the policy and advocacy part of it. Well, the code helps, but eSport should have its own sort of codes of conduct, safeguarding policies, especially if they have large populations with children and young persons or vulnerable people. We do training and education. Most of it is done through the SportSG ED online modules. We also run workshops. So this morning we ran a workshop on good touch, bad touch, right, for children's age 2 to 7, together with the Singapore Children's Society. Case management, we do that in terms of providing another channel for people to report if they experience or witness incidents of abuse. So, we really kind of see this as a cyclical process, it's only when we have sort of incidents that are reported to us, then we can say, oh, hey, maybe these policies need refining. They didn't have a policy in place for virtual environments or social media, digital communications. Can coaches be, communicating with athletes about personal matters? Is personal relationships allowed between adults and minors, especially where there's a power imbalance? And only then can we say, hey, maybe this community needs more training and education. So, and the hope is that over time that we don't just see this as a linear process, that, things sort of feed into each other. One of the things that came about through the focus group discussions was that organizations sometimes were viewed as downplaying or minimizing reports, right? And this fed into this perception that organizations are tolerating these sort of behaviors, and it is inevitable. Organizations care about participation, care about sponsors, care about what is happening within their environments. Sometimes this blinds them to, the needs of the person who has been affected. So IOC, as well as, I'm sure this term is familiar to all of you in the medical sector, it's also probably familiar to a lot of people in the social services sector in terms of what a trauma-informed approach is. And that is first acknowledging, that these things do happen in the sporting environment. Secondly, how we recognize how that impacts or affects somebody who has been involved. And then by putting policies in place to meet, some of these needs. So for example, how do we apply this trauma-informed approach within our processes? does every disclosure of an abusive incident need necessarily to result in a formal report? Sometimes people just want to talk about something and they need help or support. You know, when somebody makes a report, how many times do we ask them to tell their story again, right? Does the investigations person need to ask? And then you go and see someone else and they ask you again, or even when we're referring someone to augmented psychosocial support, how many times do they need to tell their story? In terms of safeguarding officer training, who are our first responders, how can they actively listen to someone, you know, not make them feel like they are not being believed for the report that they are making? We're also working with this Singapore National Olympic Council's Athletes Commission and the Women in Sport Committee, as well as Team NILA, to set up a safe sport support network that has qualified counselors and trained befrienders and volunteers. I think in the midst of this pandemic, and it's been reported in the press, right, that it's so difficult to get access to this sort of psychosocial support, and how can we support our athletes or people within our sporting environment, and how can we facilitate the access in a much easier way. This is a special project that we're looking at. You know, we're continuing to do research and intervention, look into intervention development. I think as members of the medical community, you'll be aware of the challenges that Singapore Medical Council has faced over the years in terms of, you know, their sanctioning guidelines. How long should somebody how long should a doctor get suspended for, you know, and there have been inconsistencies which led to a whole review of their sanctioning process. But for us, right, why it's important to define what is low, medium, or high is because of, you know, our triaging process to determine, you know, whether this should be dealt with by the Safe Sport Commission or by the organization. It will also help us determine what measures and sanctions need to be put in place. So this assessment of severity that we're doing is a little project which is qualitative in nature. I think the European Council, the cases report, has tried to do that in a quantitative, and that has its own challenges. So, you know, because each case is so specific to its case-specific factors, right? When we talk about the higher the culpability and the higher the harm caused, then automatically that should be more severe. But how do we measure culpability? So each case is specific. How frequent did the incident happen? Was it premeditated? Was there a use of threats, you know, physical threats or non-physical threats? How vulnerable is the victim? Was it a children, a young person? Was the person physically vulnerable, right? Did this person's sort of act, was it completed or was it an attempt? What was the harm suffered by the person or by the affected person in terms of their physical and emotional impact? What's the level of exploitations? Did he or she share pictures or videos of this person, you know, in a voyeuristic way, put it on platforms, you know, in such a way that, you know, the harm can never be reduced? And was there impact to other people? So we are in the midst of that, and actually we're meeting with the experts. I think probably some of the members within the SMAS we have been involved, right? Practitioners, policymakers, and researchers in terms of understanding, right, are these sub-factors? What would they consider to be low harm, moderate harm, or severe? What sort of acts would they consider to be low, medium, and high? And then we'll put that through a community calibration as well. So that's some of the work that we're continuing to do. This year as well, we hope to launch a climate survey in terms of understanding what's the prevalence within our sporting community, right, directly with participants in sport, so that to be undertaken by an independent research association that will help us really understand what the hotspots or barriers to reporting. This is my final slide. So I just want to say that, you know, we're all responsible. Doesn't mean that you're not a coach, that we don't have a duty of care. I think, you know, the Olympic movement medical code is instructive, right? The athletes enjoy the same fundamental rights as all patients in their relationships with physicians and healthcare providers, in particular respect for their human dignity, their physical and psychological well-being, the protection of their health and safety, their self-determination, and their rights to privacy and confidentiality. So that's, you know, kind of the duty that, you know, as allied medical health providers or being part of a medical entourage, you would have towards the people that you treat. One of the other things that came out of the consultations was that there's a prevailing culture of mind your own business. You know, individuals don't report inappropriate behaviors for fear of being tagged as a whistleblower. After all, our community is not large. You know, it's also well documented that, you know, when we have this bystander effect, when we take a passive attitude or non-intervention attitude, our denial, our silence, especially when we are in a supervisory position or in any position in sport, we create the impression for other people that these behaviors are legally and socially acceptable. So, we all do really have a part to play in creating a safer sporting environment for everyone. I know my colleague Joyce is speaking after this, and I'm also interested to hear, what she has to say from a practitioner's perspective. But I hope that the presentation I've given you has really kind of set up the scene for Joyce in terms of helping us understand what exactly is non-accidental violence in sport. So, thank you very much.
Thank you, Shao, very much for sharing your experience in the field and a very insightful and comprehensive talk. So next up, we have Ms. Joyce Koh. Joyce completed her training as a psychologist and obtained her Master of Applied Psychology for Sports and Exercise at the University of Queensland, Australia. She joined the Singapore Sports Institute in 2014 and works with sports scientists from other disciplines to support athletes and coaches from a range of sports to achieve optimal performance and enhance mental recovery. Joyce has also traveled with teams to support them on site at various international competitions such as the Asian Games, Commonwealth Games, World Championships, and more recently the Olympic Games. Aside from helping teams achieve their performance goals, Joyce also co-developed a mental literacy program for the sporting community in 2018 titled Mind Matters and provides support to enhance athletes and coaches' mental health and well-being. Joyce's presentation today is entitled Safe Sport, Safe Space, and without further ado, I'll hand over the time to Joyce.
Hello, Shauna. Thanks for that introduction. Also, really thank you, Shao, for that presentation. As you were presenting, I kept thinking, oh my goodness, she just covered the part that I had planned to cover. I'm probably going to have to change things. But yeah, definitely very comprehensive. And like Shao said, I think as she's mentioned, a lot of the safe sport issues, there's the underlying psychological component. And I guess that's where, myself as a practitioner, as a psychologist, we do come in and that's how we can help in supporting the athletes. So I wanted to share. Let me share my screen. Yeah, so I guess I with today's presentation, I wanted to share a little bit more about my work as a sports psychologist and how where my role is in terms of safe sport, and really most of the time it's helping to create a safe space where the athletes or any individuals for that matter, as Shao mentioned earlier, it could be anyone experiencing safe sport issues, where they have a safe space where they can kind of come to, whether it's processing the experiences and then working out how they want to respond to it and how they want to move forward with it and whether or not they need additional support. So I'll just jump straight into it by explaining a little bit about my role. Really, I think our work kind of complements a little bit of what Shao's team is doing. They've done like most of the preventative work already. And on my part as a psychologist, it's stepping in for if and when situations do happen and the athletes or the coaches or the individuals do require further support. Most of the time in a lot of my experiences so far, I've been very privileged to be one of the first few to get that information. And so it's, helping them work out, do they want to report it to Safe Sport and all that stuff. So how do we do that? For one, there's a lot of, I guess, monitoring of their behaviors and how they're going and basically, their mental well-being. Again, as covered by Shao in her presentation already, there are lasting impacts on the mental health of individuals when they are experiencing safe sport issues. So we do help with monitoring, just generally their mental health. Of course, when I talk about monitoring, we're not really referring to like formal assessments, questionnaires and stuff like that. A lot of it is because I've had long interaction with the athletes. I kind of roughly know how they generally behave. And so if there are any changes in their behavior, any changes in, just the mannerism or the way they interact with people, or just, suddenly not turning up for sessions when they've previously been very diligent with coming up to arrange for sessions with me, that's That's some of the indicators to me that, okay, you know, something might be up. There's also, just that's kind of in line with monitoring in terms of observing. There's a lot of observable behaviors. Again, in Xiao's earlier presentation, she did show, you know, some of the impact of individuals who have been affected by safe sport issues. There are behavioral signs and symptoms. And also, as part of my work as a psychologist, there are points in time where I do a mental state examination, where we look at, you know, how they present themselves. Someone who's usually kind of well groomed suddenly turn up for a session not being well groomed. You know, the clothes is like super crumpled up, eye bags, you know, not looking so well. So that's something we look at. We also look at the cognitive aspect of things. So in my conversations with them, are they able to pay attention? Are they able to stay coherent with their train of thoughts, or do they tend to like go all over the place? How's their memory like? Are there certain events that they can't seem to remember the details for? But I also look at, I guess, other behaviors. For example, their eye contact. Are they fidgety? Do they seem on edge? And so on and so forth. So these are some things that we do observe. And, you know, really what we're monitoring and observing again is their mental health. There's definitely there are a lot of signs and symptoms of when an individual is struggling, and these could be key indicators that, okay, you know, they've just experienced something traumatic. So behaviorally, you know, it could be changes in their appetite, could be having difficulty sleeping, it could be very fidgety. Physically, they might report feeling shortness of breath. They might feel like there's tightness in the chest. There's muscle tension and they can't seem to relax. You know, sometimes getting headaches, feeling dizzy. Mentally, as I mentioned earlier, you know, maybe they cannot, there are some details of certain events that they're not able to remember. They might be hyper vigilant, you know, constantly, well, not literally looking over their shoulders, but constantly trying to make sure that they're safe. You know, not able to pay attention. I've mentioned that they might have racing thoughts. And then emotionally, they might be a lot more irritable, increased anger, unprovoked anger, feeling depressed, anxious, increased you know, sense of fear. So a lot of signs and symptoms there that we do monitor and observe for. A huge part of my job is to create a safe space. Of course, for me, this is kind of, we are already trying to create a safe space for the athletes to come up to us to share about some of the struggles they might have in sport. So in terms of their sporting performances, and you know, it's a double whammy for athletes in sport. There's this whole sense of needing to be mentally tough. They don't really want people to know that they're having problems or struggling. If people know, you know, that's their weakness and other people can exploit it. Again, all these in terms of sporting performances, but by virtue of being able to create a safe space for them to be able to talk about these problems, we also create an environment where they feel safe enough to be vulnerable. And sometimes, you know, these lead to athletes feeling very comfortable in telling me, oh, you know what, coach said this today, or one of my teammates did this today, and I was really feeling very uncomfortable about it. Or, you know, because of the safe space that I've been able to create. When incidents happen to them, when they experience certain situations, they text me straight away and it's like, Joyce, can I have a quick call? I'm feeling really overwhelmed about something right now. Yeah, I mean, if I'm available, definitely I'll try to support them, but otherwise I might need to give it some time before I can respond to them. But that's the being able to create that safe space gives me that opportunity to be the support person for them. And then of course also role modeling. As Xiao mentioned, sometimes things are not reported because it's not being recognized. So my role as a psychologist, I try to help role model what's considered appropriate behaviors or what's appropriate boundaries. There might be certain things that some athletes or some coaches say in the presence of other athletes. And, you know, I might stand out and say, hey, you know what, that's actually not acceptable. So by role modeling, you know, what we consider as okay and what we consider as not okay, not, you know, not acceptable or possibly harmful, that gives the people around us who might be vulnerable to safe sport issues, that it helps them see that, hey, oh, okay, there's a certain standard. This is actually not okay, and then they can start recognizing and start reporting it. So beyond myself, doing all that stuff about observing, monitoring, creating a safe space and role modeling. Of course, we also try to teach the athletes a lot of skills that they can use that can also be helpful for them when they encounter safe sport issues. So communication skills would be one of it. A lot of times, again, because there's the power imbalance involved when we talk about safe sport issues, most of the athletes and the other individuals who experience safe sport issues, they don't dare to speak up. They don't dare to communicate. They will share it with me, and then they don't necessarily try to share it with anyone else. So it's working through with them how they might want to word it, how they might want to structure it. For some of them, they do want to step up and confront the person whom they are struggling with. So it's role playing, giving them a structure of how they can formulate their thoughts, how they can organize the information, what kind of outcomes or consequences they would like to see out of that conversation, or I guess that confrontation with the individual that they're struggling with. We also teach them problem-solving skills. Sometimes other than just facing with the problem and then feeling overwhelmed and not quite sure what to do with it, we help them break it down, identifying what really is the key issue here, what are the possible solutions, where are the resources, who are the resources they can reach out to get the help and also to get the support, and then working from there. Of course, in talking about problem solving, we also help with them understanding, there are certain things that's beyond their control, or certain things that's within their control that maybe they can do to try and change. And in identifying that, it's also making sure that the solutions that they're coming up with, it's feasible and something that can be done. And if it's not something that they can control, is it something else that someone else can do? And then it's about approaching them. So as mentioned with the problem solving, it's helping athletes understand what are the resources, who are the resources, where are the resources at. With the Safe Sport Unified Code out and the Safe Sport Taskforce in place, a lot of the times with most of the athletes that I've worked with who encountered safe sport issues, it was so much easier after the Safe Sport Taskforce was up that I can kind of say, okay, this might be something you want to speak to the Safe Sport Taskforce about, because these are some of the possible problems in here, some of the possible issues here that I think the Safe Sport Taskforce could support you with. So being able to share that information with them, which is why it's so important for you guys to hear from Shao, to know what's happening in the background, to know what the information available and what are the resources available for the athletes, because that's also something we can do for them. Finally, a huge part of my work is teaching athletes mental skills. And so a lot of these mental skills can, while it's looking at helping them in their sporting performances, most of these mental skills are also life skills that can be transferable across many, many situations. And we want to help the athletes understand that these life skills that they use can help with buffering their resilience, can help with supporting their mental health and facilitating mental well-being. So things like emotion regulation strategies, self-talk, identifying when there's cognitive distortions or when they're beating themselves up unnecessarily. All these skills can be really helpful with helping them cope with the situation that they might encounter. Yeah. Next slide. Come on. Oh no, I think my slide hanged. Oh, there we go. So I thought, oh man, my presentation's lasting shorter than I expected it to. So I thought I wanted to leave you guys with some strategies or something to think about in terms of how you guys can also help with creating a safe space, for be it the athletes that we work with or just the people in the sporting industry. And I tried to come up with an acronym. It's not perfect, so bear with me. And I thought, keep it simple, keep it easy to remember. The acronym is SAFE, right? So how can we support? First one, very straightforward, being supportive. Of course, when I talk about being supportive, we are trying to be helpful. We want to be there to, to assure them that, yes, we recognize you're in trouble and we want to see what we can do to help you. The other point, A for acknowledge, as Shao say, sometimes athletes and other individuals don't really want to report the situation because people might dismiss them. So it's very important that we do acknowledge their experiences. We do validate their feelings. In a sense, we are bearing witness to the experience that they have when they tell their stories. We also want to be friendly. We want to be kind. We want to be warm. We want to be open. These could include things like making sure that you have an open body language, right? We make eye contact with them. We are facing them. We're not hunched over. Arms crossed doesn't really make us come across as being friendly. And our tone as well, all that makes quite a bit of a difference in terms of creating a friendly atmosphere. And finally, being empathic. So when we talk about empathy, it's not the same as sympathy. We want to be there to help in terms of recognizing that, yes, they have certain feelings. Those feelings are valid. We hear you. We hear your feelings. We hear your thought processes. We understand, this experience that you're going through is really difficult. So yeah, this is kind of like the tips of my trade, I guess, in terms of how we can support the athletes. And I guess I do kind of thought I might, just wrap up with sharing a little bit of a case or an example, and in terms of sharing how, we can show this or demonstrate, this acronyms, being supportive, acknowledging, and being friendly and being empathic. So I've mentioned just now, there was an athlete who texted me to say that she was feeling overwhelmed, to say that they were feeling overwhelmed and they wanted to have a chat. I wasn't available at that point of time, so I could only get back to the athlete about an hour later. And when the athlete called, the athlete was crying, sobbing, fairly incoherent, couldn't really hear what the athlete was saying. And it was right off the start, it wasn't about telling her to slow down, or at least my style, it wasn't really about telling the athlete to slow down, to take a deep breath and all that. It was letting the athlete getting out whatever she could get out, catching whatever information I could get, and then trying to clarify if I've heard the information correctly. So that helps with the empathic part of things also, because I'm trying to show that I am trying to understand. I'm trying to clarify some of the feelings that they might be experiencing, and also asking, okay, what is the most pressing issue here? How can I support you with that? What are the key outcomes that the athlete might be wanting to get to? Of course, sometimes the athlete at that point of time won't understand that, won't recognize what it is that they might want to, what kind of outcomes they want to have at that moment. But it's just really supporting them, helping them feel like, in their distress, there's someone that they can lean on, someone they can speak to. It's also acknowledging a lot of the feelings. It was, I guess, in terms of me responding to the athlete, it was saying things like, oh, that's really tough. That must have been really scary for you. That was really confusing for you. I hear that you're really scared. I hear that you feel very alone. You feel very isolated. You don't know who to turn to. So it's acknowledging all the feelings, acknowledging what's happening for her. I kind of skipped the friendly part because we were already very familiar with each other. So it wasn't very much on, I guess, showing the kindness or being the warmth. Also, we were constrained a little bit in terms of the communication methods, because the athlete called me over the phone, so there was no video calls, stuff like that. There was no opportunity for me to provide any non-verbal cues. So yeah, hopefully that helps with illustrating the safe aspect. And yeah, my presentation is pretty short and sweet. Hopefully the questions that might come would help with clarifying things a little bit more. And again, thanks, Shao, for presenting most of what I wanted to say. Saved me a long time. But yeah, otherwise, thank you.
Thank you, Joyce, for the interesting talk and sharing some of your experience of working with some of our athletes. So now I'd like to open the floor to any questions. And as mentioned earlier, any questions can be typed in the chat section, and then we will redirect it to the speakers. So maybe I'll start off the Q&A session. So maybe this first question, I'll direct it at Shao. Could I just check, like, for athletes, or maybe more relevant to us would be medical professionals, if we do think that any of the athletes that need to contact someone with regards to a safe sport issue, what are the channels available to them?
Oh, thanks for that question, Shauna. So, now that there is the Safe Sport Commission, you can kind of report it directly through the website. There's a form. There's also an email address. If the athlete belongs to an NSA, or depending on where they are participating, if they're a national athlete, it can be, and they represent a certain sport, it can be done through the safeguarding officer of their own organization. Some people may have reservations about reporting through a person within their organization, and that's why, we're here and available for direct reporting. So, and again, when I say the word report, right, it's normally laden with a lot of things like, oh, you made a report against me, but, sometimes the reporting can be treated as a disclosure. They are not sure. They may not be sure about what exactly has happened, not sure whether this constitutes something that needs to be reported. It may also be that they just want to tell somebody and they're not sure where to seek help. So, you can always come to us, or like I said, there are safeguarding officers that have been trained across all the national sporting associations, and they will be able to assist because they are trained as first responders. We teach them how to, in the safeguarding officer training, to actively listen. Some of the things that Joyce has expressed in terms of being friendly, supportive, not questioning somebody's experience, but just there more to listen, right, and to take in an intake. That's the intake part. So, and to support.
Sorry, can I just jump in here? It's something that I also completely forgot to mention in the presentation, and great that, Shauna, you were asking about the reporting. I think there are some issues around confidentiality there as well that might be a concern. At least for myself as a site, there are, I'm bounded by a code of conduct, and it's basically, even in my intake, I tell the athletes whatever's shared within these four walls is kept within these four walls. So if there are any situations where I do need to report, I usually ask for permission from the athletes first. And I think it's also being clear around what we are reporting. For example, if I guess I kind of separate it into objective versus subjective. Objective issues would be like physical harm, right? If the athlete or the other individuals obviously have been abused, there's physical bruises, there's cuts and stuff like that, then definitely I will be reporting it. And again, this is part and parcel of my intake with the athletes. I do let them know the point in time where I will, break the confidentiality is if I think you might be of harm or other people might be at harm. So at least at the start, right at the start, they know. In terms of the subjective issues of things, we need to also remember that while they may report or they may be saying certain things, or while they might, report's not an appropriate word here, while they may be sharing certain information with us, as Shao said, sometimes they just want to have a listening ear, not necessarily that they want to do anything about it. And all of us, when we're at the receiving end of this information, we kind of need to put our own judgment aside for a little bit, and also recognizing what our own biases and our own beliefs about what's considered safe sport. Because if by letting people know, or us telling Safe Sport about the issues, and Safe Sport wants to launch an investigation, then this individual feels even more unsafe, then we kind of might be making things worse here. So in terms of saying whether or not we should report, for the subjective issues at least, it's making sure that we are able to help the athlete or the individual clarify, okay, is this something you do want to disclose to the Safe Sport Taskforce? Yeah, and then I think then make that decision. And I think for myself as a psych, sometimes it's really hard to kind of sit back and say, okay, I think you should really report this, but I will leave it up to you to decide. And then just sitting and seeing what they will do, because there are times, there's so many athletes who choose not to do anything about it, and it gets really, really frustrating for myself. But I also need to respect that this is their decision and their choice of what they want to do with it.
Thank you. There's a question in the chat from Chris. So his question is, what would you advise when an athlete is facing injury that is affecting their performance? So maybe I'll direct this to Joyce first.
The question's a little vague. When you mean facing injury, I guess, is the injury caused, like I said, is it because it's caused from like a physical abuse, or don't have much context for me to be able to answer that.
Maybe Chris can clarify what the question is, but I would say that if you seeing an athlete who you think is overtraining, or is about to suffer more severe injuries because of overtraining, then that's something that perhaps if you were part of the entourage that you can alert on, say to the coach. As a national coach before, I many times had my physio say to me, we do monitoring of training loads, but we do the physio is, I make it known that the physio can say to me, as thank you, Chris, as the head coach, that I'm completely open to her saying that, hey, I think we need to take this down a notch, right? There's too much contact this week. We need to reduce the training loads. I'm beginning to see a lot of this type of injuries, or maybe it could be it could be a safety issue. It doesn't necessarily have to be overtraining. Like we've been doing a lot of training on AstroTurf. We're beginning to see a lot of ankle, knee issues, and perhaps we need to, get off the hard surface for a while. So I think that the relationship you have with, whoever's in charge, or the person who is in a position of authority, that rapport that you build with them is important in terms of kind of approaching these issues. It's sometimes hard to tell the athlete to go and tell the coach, because the athlete themselves feel like, well, if I say this, then the coach is going to think I'm slacking off, or I cannot take it, I'm not resilient enough, I'm too weak mentally to do this rigorous training. So it does take someone like the allied health professionals to step in, right? Sometimes to speak up on behalf of the athlete, simply because of that power imbalance. So I hope that helps to answer your question, Chris.
Yeah, for myself, if it's overtraining, because I do work with the physiologist and the biomech and the strength conditioning coach and our dietitian, so I have most of the time I might use is such a most of the time I might inform my physiology colleagues. My physiology colleagues are usually the one monitoring training load. They are also usually the one advising or sharing about periodization. So I might kind of let my physiologist colleague know that this might be happening, and I leave it and I try to get them to follow up with the coach, because what they say about overtraining has way more weight than what I would, than if I tell the coach, oh, I think there's overtraining happening, because I'm a psychologist. I deal more with matters of the mind and the heart than the body. So I try to use I guess my networks that way.
Thank you for those tips and pointers. We have a question from Ing Xian asking, how can allied health professionals catch the identifiers that our patients or athletes may be suffering from non-safe sport practices that may or may not have resulted in conditions or injuries that they're seeing us for? So maybe I'll direct that to Joyce first.
Yeah. So if it's again, because there are psychological components to trauma, whether it's physical trauma or emotional trauma, we can look at the behaviors, the changes in behaviors. If the athlete seems withdrawn, or the way they speak to you seems, like they're quite timid, or they don't necessarily want to give the full details, or if you ask them, things like how did you get injured, and they're not able to necessarily give you the details, those could be signs that there might be some non-violent, safe sport issues happening there. I think sometimes it's also worthwhile because if we're looking at, say, injury as a biopsychosocial model, then it's also understanding what might be happening in the athlete's context, finding out what's happening at training. Maybe we can't get it from the athletes. We might have to find out from athletes who are in a similar sport, or if we've had the opportunity to speak to the parents or to the coach. For some of us, we have the privilege of being able to go down to the trainings to see for ourselves what might be happening. And then that gives us a little bit more information and helps us identify some of the red flags in terms of whether there's safe sport issues happening there.
Okay. Following on from that, I think Joyce did in some way answer this question, but are there what sort of observations or questions do we focus our attention on in order to find out more within our professional scope? So this is a follow-on from the question before. For example, is the athlete made to overtrain or training at excessive loads? Is there verbal abuse from fellow participants, coaches or team managers? So maybe I'll direct this first to Shao to answer and see if there's anything she'd like to add on to what Joyce mentioned before.
I think this is more of a, within your professional scope. So I guess depending on what your role is, whether you're a doctor or you're a physio or an allied health professional, there you have your code of ethics, right? Your own code of ethics to adhere to. But certainly if something has, there's a yellow flag or really a red flag, then that should prompt you to ask some follow-up questions without being necessarily too intrusive, and then you'll be able to act on some of that information once you have gotten, and of course this, like Joyce said, has a lot to do with building rapport with the person, coming across as non-judgmental plus supportive in terms of asking questions. So, I think that's what I would say, in so far as I can say this from in terms of people's professional sort of capacities.
I think I just want to add on here that I think I have the privilege of building a long-term relationship, like with the athletes or with the coaches or just with the people in the sports ecosystem for that particular sport. So that makes it a lot easier, I guess, in terms for me to kind of know what to look out for, what sort of questions I can ask, who I can ask, and stuff like that. But for some of you guys, if it's you only see them for one, hopefully if it's serious injuries, then maybe it's longer term, yes. Then that just having that time definitely helps. With knowing what sort of questions to ask and what sort of observations, what sort of things to look out for. But if it's a very short period of time, that makes it super tricky. But yeah, like Shao said, being non-judgmental, I think coming in with the approach of being curious to understand what's happened, rather than coming in with the idea that there's a safe sport issue and I need to find what that issue is, that automatically you kind of narrow your field of vision or attention, so to speak, in terms of what you want to look out for. And there could be confirmation bias if we already decided, there's going to be a safe sport issue, or no, there's no safe sport issue. And then no matter what questions or what signs there are, because we've already decided what's happened, then we're just going to find the answer that confirms our belief. So really adopting more of a curious attitude, just to find out more and get more information.
I think there's one other thing that I'll add there, which is that most of the time, the medical professional, the allied health professional is the third eye, right? Oftentimes in sport, we are so entrenched, in the ways that we do things, in the ways that we've been in certain environments for a long time. The athletes themselves are used to certain cultures or the code that, they have been asked to operate under. So, when a medical person comes into the picture, whether they are here for one time, two times, as when I was coaching before as a head coach, I would just say like, oh, how do you find it? and sometimes they may make one small remark or throw a remark, which will make me think like, hey, so this person from outside is seeing this, right? And maybe we are too blind to be seeing the things that, these things, because we've been in this environment for so long and doing the things that we've been doing, we just, everybody just goes along with whatever this is. And maybe this is not the way to do it. So, I don't think necessarily that approaching the people who are in a position of supervisory positions is a bad thing. It doesn't necessarily mean that you want to report on somebody. It could be, a subtle remark or something that you say to say that you've observed this. It doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to make a report or something.
I think just also trusting your gut. We're all coming from a space of wanting to help, coming from a space of wanting to keep, the athletes or the individuals we're seeing safe. If, in your gut, like something's wrong, there are alarm bells going, act on that gut. And if it turns out to be a false alarm, hey, at least we've made sure we checked it out first. So I think trusting your gut, don't be afraid to ask, I guess, the wrong questions in this sense when we're trying to gather information.
Thank you. We have another question from Cindy Chin. So her question is, we recognize that athletes are not keen to report as it may affect their chances of competing or getting selected to compete. How would you advise on such situations, whether it's at the school, club, or national level? So maybe I'll direct this to Shao first.
Yeah, thanks, Shauna. I think this is one of the biggest issues, right? Because of the power imbalance within sport, you feel like if you go against the grain, or if you disagree, or you do anything that kind of raises issues to rock the boat, then there could be repercussions against you. And that came out within the focus group discussions. So whether it be deselection, be denied access to facilities or resources, I mean, these are all things that people feel like, either in fact they happen, there's retaliation, or they think that if they do so, there will be some repercussions. So, which is why we have the disclosure process, which does not trigger a formal investigation. There are, I think it's a delicate balance. We want to meet the needs of the person who is reporting, but we also need to be fair to the person who is whom the report is being made against. So is there a middle ground, and is there a way for us to support this person whilst recognizing that, hey, if I reveal your identity in this report, then it will be, everyone know, oh, is this person who reported, right? Is this person who was the whistleblower? So in many ways, there are many close associations with whistleblowing policies. And as far as possible, we try to keep the anonymity of the person without compromising the rights of, in law, we call it the natural justice requirements, right? That someone is treated fairly when there is a complaint lodged. So it is a tricky process, but, it really does vary from case to case. We do get sometimes reports under which we have no jurisdiction. And by jurisdiction, I mean that, for example, it's not an NSA incident to which an NSA has delegated power to the Safe Sport Taskforce. But maybe the coach is, if it is related to coach, that coach is registered under the National Registry of Coaches, then, then there is another sort of jurisdictional field that we can look at. So, I think that, Cindy, it's not an easy question to answer, but we try and implement sort of instruments to say that there is this channel, there is this way that we can go, and then, depending on what report we receive, then we try and implement the best thing that we can do.
I usually take this as, again, this is because of the nature of my work that I get the opportunity to do this. But in my work, this is an example of, an athlete or the individual having to make a choice. Do they decide on option A or option B? And again, my role is not to help them make the decision, my role is not to tell them which decision is the best to make, or which decision should I advise them to take. but I help facilitate with the decision-making process by making sure they are making an informed decision. If and when they make this decision, what does it encompass? What are the consequences? What are the possibilities? Sometimes I also get them to think, okay, 1 year down the road, if you've made this decision, and what would it look like? And then fast forward 5 years down the road, what consequences would this decision have for the future you? And then we kind of go a little bit of back and forth. Okay, now decision B, what are the issues surrounding it? What are the possible consequences? What are your considerations? And then if you've made the decision 1 year down the road, 5 years down the road, and then kind of leaving them with the information. A lot of times it's also helping them see the decision's not a dichotomy. It's not either A or B. Like Shao say, there's this other process, just a disclosure process, which could be an option C. Is that something they're willing to consider? Again, also going through that whole, what are the consequences? What are the things involved in that 1 year down the road, 5 years down the road? So this could be something I do with athletes. It sometimes doesn't happen in just one session. It takes like a few sessions for them to eventually work out which decision they'd like to make. And at the end of it, as I've mentioned earlier, it's while I may encourage them to take certain decisions that could be more helpful from them from my perspective, I do let them know whichever decision they make, I'll be there to support them at the end of it, to help follow through and make sure that they are still safe and they still reach their sporting goals.
Thank you. So I have a question for Joyce. I think you were mentioning earlier that there's some mental strategies that you teach athletes if you think that there's an issue with safe sport to help them cope on their own. Could I ask what are some of these mental strategies that you teach them?
So this is more of drawing on some of the mental skills that they might have learned in terms of for their sporting performances. So for example, with say athletes with a lot of self-doubt, right? They might have a lot of negative self-talk. They might have some thought processes that are irrational, that are not logical, it's distorted. So we call that cognitive distortion. And we would, as part of coping with that self-doubt or coping with the negative self-talk, it's teaching them the skills of being mindful, being able to notice when the thoughts occur. Most of the time, individuals' self-awareness are a lot lower than they think it is. They don't realize that they're feeling something or thinking something. They are reactive to their thoughts or their feelings. But by being mindful, engaging in the practice of mindfulness, it helps give them a little bit of space between the thought and the feeling before they choose a behavior or before they choose a reaction. And in that space, because you have the choice, you can choose to do something that's more helpful for you rather than reacting in ways that's not so helpful. So mindfulness is one of it. There are also, I guess, some of the other strategies will also include things like testing your thought processes. Are those thought process, if I say I'm the worst athlete ever, okay, is there ways for me to test that to prove myself right or wrong? How am I founding this belief? Maybe it's actually completely not true at all. So going through a whole process of, okay, like where can I find evidence for or against this? With all these evidence, do I still want to hold on to this belief that obviously is not helping me? And so on and so forth. Or the other strategies also include things like emotion regulation strategies. So that could be things like deep breathing. It could be things like using imagery and stuff like that. But of course, we want to make sure that these mental skills we are using, it's not for them to avoid the situation. It's for them to cope with the situation. And it gives them some time or some space to think through things, to consider it before deciding, okay, how do they want to proceed with it? Otherwise, human beings are built hardwired to want to avoid danger. And the Singaporean society, we're more likely to want to avoid rather than approach. Some of these skills are more for, okay, let's stop this whole like instinctively avoiding and moving away from it process. Let's just like stay where we are first, figure out what's happening, figure out what we want to do, and then move from there. If it's avoiding at the end of it, that's okay. If it's approaching and making some changes, that's okay too. Hope that makes sense.
Yes, it does. Thank you for that. So I have a question from Joshua. Are there any hard stop situations with regards to safe sport where we are obligated to report to authorities with or without the athlete's permission? So I think Joyce mentioned one of them just now, like when the athlete is at risk of harming themselves or others. So just asking if there are any other situations where we would be obligated to report the athlete. So maybe I'll direct this to Shao.
Yeah, thanks, Joshua, for that question. It's a question that we get a lot, and the answer is not as straightforward as you think. I would say that if you look to the law, it says under Section 424 of the Criminal Procedure Code. I'm not sure how many people even, will go and look at that, but there is a legal obligation on individuals to report as a third party if you are aware of the intention to commit any reportable offense or that an reportable offense has been committed. So what is this reportable offense? There's a schedule of offenses. A lot of them are with regards to offenses against a person. So, the more serious ones and where people are likely, arrestable offenses. So again, I think if you can cast your mind back to a year or two ago when NUS reported, those sexual incidents that happened within NUS against the wishes of the students that had reported it. And then, NUS had to come out and kind of defend why they decided to make those reports, even though, the victims themselves didn't want it to be reported. And that's because of this obligation. Now, NUS is a institution. It is answerable and has a duty of care to all its student body, to its faculty, and therefore, they made that decision on that basis, bearing in mind who their stakeholders are. They are not the only organization which has struggled with this. Singapore Children's Society also has asked MHA, and they put out a press statement to say that they would like to understand also, because they feel like if they are oftentimes when their people are in contact with children and young persons, if the victim knows that you're going to report them, maybe they won't share the incident with you, right? So that creates a difficult situation. So, in terms of clarity, what does this Section 424 require of us? If I'm not wrong, to date, nobody's been prosecuted for not reporting, but certainly we take guidance from that in terms of there is an obligation, legal obligation, right, under the law to report. And I think that, looking as medical healthcare professionals, looking to your professional bodies, right, in terms of, because that's the capacity you're acting in, that would be a good kind of a guideline. So I don't know whether there are any of those within, the professions here. Yeah.
I'm sorry, I just wanted to ask Shao. So since you're a lawyer by training, I thought myself get it out there and ask all the questions related to that. I'm not. Are there say specific vulnerable groups where we do have to apparently it seems like young children, there's not so much. Even children's society are struggling with it. Then I'm just wondering for other vulnerable groups, like say the older folks or oh wait, what am I talking about? Older folks, not necessarily in sport, but say persons with disability and all that. Is there something there that can help with helping us work out? Okay, are we obligated to report this?
I don't have the information off the top of my head about whether Section 424 of the CPC covers, those other acts, so the Mental Capacity Act, vulnerable populations, and children and young persons. But I would imagine, that it does. But again, I need to check specifically. So, like I said, when it's related to your capacity of how you're behaving as an individual, always best to check with the body or that you belong to in terms of what the reporting obligations are in this case. And then in particular for the health professionals, right, that you have this duty of confidentiality also. So that's it's a bit different from, let's say, you're a NUS case manager who receives, you are there to be the case manager to receive reports. Whereas in this, it's incidental to your profession or to your work where you do, come across something.
Thank you.
I'm not sure whether that clears anything up. Okay. About as clear as mud, really.
you. Just asking the participants again, are there any further questions? Okay, if there are no further questions, I'd like to thank everybody for spending their Saturday afternoon with us. And once again, many thanks to our two speakers for your time, sharing your valuable experience and expertise in this field, and engaging in the question and answer session with us.